Well, hi everybody, Father Alex here. Welcome to another episode of the Godcast. I am the vicar of St Matthew's Church in Burnley. I'm also the author of Our Daily Bread from Argos to the Altar, which is my book, which you can see if you're watching this. That's available in Waterstones and in all good bookshops and online, so do check that out. If you do enjoy my interviews, do have a look. There's loads of musicians, politicians, authors, clerics, something for everybody, sports people, TV personalities. But my guest today on the Godcast is Guy Fletcher, and Guy is a former member of the Roxy music band, but probably more famously and significantly was part of Dire Straits. So I do hope you enjoy this interview with Guy now, and thank you for watching the Godcast. Well, I'm delighted to say that joining me on the Godcast this week is Guy Fletcher. Guy, it's wonderful to get you on the Godcast. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks. Nice to be here.
You look like you're quite busy there. You did mention you're in the studio. Busy? Is it a busy time for you?
It's always busy. I'm in my little den at the back of my garden. Um, yes, so um, yeah, I just potter around in here. I sometimes call it work, but I'm fortunate enough to actually enjoy what I do.
Yeah, Guy. When you agreed to come on the Godcast, I was looking at various different interviews, and I came across one where you told a story of how you went to your careers advisor and you told them that you wanted to be a musician and you were kind of poo-pooed and sent away.
Yeah.
What happened next? What
Well,
happened
it
after
was a
that?
little bit more than poo-pooed. He actually laughed
Yeah.
in my face, which was I found it strange even then. I mean, all it did was it spurred me on to it made me more determined to do what I'd already made up my mind to do. Um, so I just kind of got my head down and wrote to as many people as I could in the music industry, wrote to recording studios, having just left school. Um, and, out of the dozens of letters that I wrote, I got one reply. And that's all it took really. And so I became a T-boy or a runner for ATV Music in Soho, or actually in Mayfair, and um, and I got to know London, and I got to know the people in the music business. That was a music publishing house, so I got to know songwriters, and having to deliver tapes to studios, I got to understand the studio scene, and it was within about a year that I got a little job in a recording studio called DJM, as an assistant, where I kind of learned my early trade as an engineer.
And how far were you on as a musician? Were you already playing the keyboards or guitar at that point?
Yeah, I was kind of dabbling in everything. I started playing bass when I was 12, and with being in a musical family, there were instruments all around me, so I was fortunate to be able to have access to a piano and guitars and God knows what else. And I just sort of picked up an understanding of how music was made. My mum was a singer, and my dad was a guitar player. My uncle became a music publisher. He was a trumpet player at the time, so it was sort of all around me, um, which gave me the confidence to go with my original dream, which was to do something in the industry.
Were you elevating to a particular genre of music at a young age? I remember when I was at school in the 80s, there was kind of two traits. There was the kind of the guys who were into AC/DC and Rainbow, and there was me who was a bit of a new romantic. But what was it? What was it for you?
Uh, well, it was, I mean, everything really. I loved, I loved listening to jazz. I loved music. I loved pop music. And when I first heard the Beatles when I was 6, that kind of really kick-started my kind of my brain in terms of the way music was put together. And I started to actually contemplate how it was done. And again, fortunately, I was surrounded by bits of equipment, because my dad, being an audio engineer, used to build consoles, and so there was always electronics in the house and tape machines. And I sort of soon realized that that was how music was made. And so, the fascination never left me from that very early age.
Mm. And as a young guy, were you raised in? I mean, this is the Godcast. Was there any spiritual stuff going on in the Fletcher household?
Not at the time particularly, although many years later, my mum did discover God, and it changed her perspective completely. I think she needed something at that time of her life. I think I'd just left home. So no, actually, no, it was a few years after that. And she just completely embraced the Lord and became, I mean, she was always a singer. She did a lot of sessions when I was a kid, but from that point, she started singing about God, and so she and my dad made lots of records in that genre, and she really enjoyed it, and she obviously gained a lot of comfort in that, and yeah, and peace, I should say.
And how was that for you, Guy? Was that strange? Did you go
It
with the
was
flow?
strange.
Or?
It was strange at first because it was very sudden. And of course, I think, like most people who discover something new, wanted to share it. And there was a little bit of reluctance from within the family. But, it didn't last long. And it was everybody accepted that. It didn't really affect me so much because I was so busy doing my thing. But it was just lovely to know that my mum was very happy,
Yeah,
because it did make her happy.
yeah. And has it led you to explore choral music in any way, or for
Not
example, you
really,
play the church?
not really, not really, because it's sort of been around all the time. I've had experience of it um, all throughout my career. There was one record I made in the '90s, I think, in New York, where we recorded a gospel choir. Um, I mean, I loved every minute of it. I loved. It's not really affected me in any way, really. I just see it as another form of music,
Yeah.
which is, of course, where my spirituality lays.
Well, I'll come back to that because the question I want to ask you in a moment. But if we could just kind of go back to when you started working in music production, what was the next step from there for you, Guy? Where was the first route into being in a band? Did you start a band? Were you part of a band? Just
Yeah.
for people who don't know, just share that with us.
Well, I was part of a band throughout that whole process. Well, from leaving school, um, I think, like many people, we get involved in school bands, and most of them fall by the wayside. Some of the band members, struggle on and try and make something of themselves. I was one of those lucky people, and um, the band I was in at the time kind of grew. We were doing gigs, and at the same time I was working for the publishing company, and then the recording studio, we were active, and it soon became apparent that I had to choose one or the other. And I chose the band. I actually chose to go with the band because, well, I enjoyed it, and it just felt right at the time. I'm glad I did, because the band evolved and became something else. And then I got spotted in a pub by the woman who became my manager at the time. And this is sort of late '70s, early '80s. And so I was introduced to the world of music through a different route. So I'd done my engineering bit, and then I sort of became involved in bands. And one of the first bands I was um, became a member of, that was a proper working band, was Steve Harley and Cockney Rebel, and I did a UK tour with them when I was 18, I think I was, or 19. Um, so it all moved quite quickly, and from then on, of course, I joined bigger and bigger bands. From Cockney Rebel, I went to Roxy Music, and then I met Mark through my manager, through our mutual managers, and became a member of Dire Straits.
I'm fascinated to ask, Guy, what was it like leaving that original pub band to join an outfit such as Cockney Rebel? And what was the, was it like going from the Conference League to the Premier League, or was it? Just explain that to us.
Yeah, it was. It was great because I got roadies and I didn't have to lug my gear around. No, it was great in lots of ways, obviously. Um, and it just felt like, I mean, it just felt like an evolution. It was a nice, slow evolution for me. And again, I count myself lucky that it was that, and it wasn't suddenly thrust into being in a, I mean, I was in a quite a big band, but it wasn't sudden. It was a slow process, so I could sort of get used to it. And because of that kind of slow evolution, I think I dealt with it better, and I managed to retain a level head because it's not easy when you're in a very high profile outfit. It's quite difficult, especially for youngsters, to deal with that kind of adulation and popularity.
Did you have those kind of starstruck moments when you were on the stage with these guys, thinking, "Have I landed here?" Or were you kind of
Yeah,
comfortable in your own skin?
I never wondered how I landed there, but I do remember thinking the first time I played Hammersmith Odeon that um, I looked around and thought, I've done it, because I went to many gigs at Hammersmith Odeon in my early teens and saw many bands there. And I always said to myself, one day I'm going to be on that stage. And then there I was. So I did have that moment where I thought, yes, I'm actually on this stage now. And it was very satisfying. Um, and then I just carried on, got on with my work.
Was it difficult going from one band to another, or was it quite a smooth transition where you just kind of picked up the mantle wherever you landed, or?
No, it was fine. It was similar in some ways to being a session musician, where you just take on a different role and you learn a whole new set of songs, and um, yeah, and off you go. You just do it. It involves quite a bit of hard work, especially if it's music you're unfamiliar with completely, as Dire Straits was when I joined. I had no history of I didn't know anything about music at all. Um, and it didn't bother me because it didn't bother anyone else either, because what we were doing was a new album, and so everything was new to everybody. So because my first role in that band was a studio recording, so it was fine.
Yeah, there are. I guess there are a few people, Guy, who go from one of the world's great bands in Roxy Music to a band that goes on to become one of the biggest bands of all time. Um, what made you kind of move on? Was it the friendship and the relationship with Mark, or was it
Um,
the attraction of writing new stuff, or what was it?
no, it wasn't my decision really. It just happened. It just happened that way. I did a tour with Roxy Music, and the tour finished, and so therefore I was unemployed, and I just happened to meet Mark around that time, and so I went from one gig into another. It really wasn't a conscious decision on my part, as with most of my career. It just happens. The more people you know, the more chances of getting a job you have. And I suppose just, yeah, being out there and being around, made it more likely.
And you come into Dire Straits to be the beginning of the of Brothers in Arms, and I'm sure you've
Yeah.
had endless questions about this album, Guy. But I wonder how soon in the process you knew you were onto something really special. Was it quite early, or
No, it wasn't. No, we didn't know um, throughout the whole recording, really. I mean, obviously the band was successful, but I don't think that we really thought it was going to be as well. Of course, we didn't. We had no idea it was going to be as huge as it did. And again, it was sort of there and big before we realized. It wasn't anything. It wasn't like, we had this song and thought this is going to be a number one. Although we could easily have thought that with Money for Nothing, or Walk of Life, or any of the the big songs on the album. We certainly didn't think in that way at all. It was really just about the music and getting it done and making it as good as we possibly could.
Were there any kind of oh crikey moments? This is getting out of hand. When did you kind of think, wow, this is becoming bigger than we ever possibly could have imagined?
I mean, I never had those thoughts at all. I coped with it quite well. The size of the venues, the size of the gigs were huge, and I must say I didn't really necessarily enjoy the stadium gigs we did as much as the smaller ones, just simply by virtue of the fact you're not quite as connected with the audience as you are within a smaller gig. But I mean, you'd have to ask Mark really, because it was just him and John. They decided that after that tour it was enough. Sorry, after the next tour. So we did 2 tours. Because it did get bigger and bigger. So after the Brothers in Arms tour, we recorded on every street and did another tour, which of course was huge. And it was at that point where I think certainly Mark thought it was just too much and wanted to back off. I didn't have a problem with it at all. I was enjoying it.
Yeah. And what's your relationship with the album now, Guy? I often wonder if
Brothers in Arms.
yeah.
It's quite interesting actually, because having been asked to remix it in Dolby Atmos, it was a wonderful voyage of rediscovery to be able to go back to the original masters and multi-tracks and rebuild it in that format. The first thing that struck me was how beautifully recorded it was. Neil Dorsman was the producer and engineer on that album, and he really did a phenomenal job. Bearing in mind it was new technology, it was one of the first all digital records, and digital technology at the time wasn't that amazing compared to the way it sounds today. It sounded pretty basic and sort of screechy. But he made a really warm, beautiful sounding record, and obviously Mark's songs lent themselves to that, and the whole package became what it is. And so, creating an Atmos version was extraordinary, and it's been very well received. And if you get a chance to hear it, you should.
I mean, I'm curious, Guy, what life was like after, after you say Mark, the guys called it a day. I've spoken to numerous people on the Godcast, Spider Stacy from the Pogues and Rick Witter from Shed 7, both talked a kind of a sense of grief. Was it easy to let go? Were you kind of mournful? How was it?
And I think when you've done something that big, I wouldn't call it grieving. It's just you have to go into a different way of thinking. Personally, I don't. I try and remain as positive as I can, because there's always something around the corner, or at least I hope there is. But I've gone through many periods of unemployment between. When you look at the CV on paper, it looks wonderful, and you think, well, that's just an amazing career. But there are plenty of spaces in there and so in some cases, whole years of literally no work. And of course, the problem with that is you've earned a lot of money and then you've earned nothing. And so, unless you've been very careful with your tax, you you can end up owing quite a lot of money very easily. And so it was very up and down for a long time, and that's just the way it is for a sort of a session musician, which is really essentially what I have been. So it's dealing with that is just something that you have to do, and so I don't really associate it with grief. because it's not something that I cherish that much. I mean, what I really cherish is my family. And so I can't really call it that. I can't really equate the two. But it was, it was a little down.
Yeah. I wonder I think I'm trying to think what the fans want to ask. And I suppose, what was the relationship with the guys afterwards? Spoke to the drummer from the jam. I went to see him talk about his career and how the relationship of the band just collapsed and
Mm.
Paul Weller relationship just dissolved. Um, did it take a while for you to get friendships back, or did they remain intact? How was it?
No, no, I still remain in touch with most of the guys. Um, when you split up, you do naturally fall. You go on and do your own thing, and you choose certain friends to stay in touch with. Um, and sometimes that's not a choice. Sometimes it's just the way it is. And obviously, Mark, I've been very close to for many years, and I stay in touch with John. Not least because we play golf together quite often. So yeah, we keep in touch.
For anybody who's interested in this, John Ilsley from Dire Straits has also been a guest on the Godcast, so do check that out.
Yeah.
So what came next then, Guy? How long did you take a sabbatical? Or were you keen to get back at it quite quickly?
Well, I produced a few records for other people. I did some sessions, whatever came along really. And then I got to writing film music. This studio I built here was originally designed and built for um, film music and mixing, because at the time, which is 20 years ago now, I was doing that, film and TV music, and of course I've done plenty of that with Mark. But there was never really, from the time Dire Straits split up, Mark has done many projects since then, and he's um, asked me to be involved in pretty much every single one of them. So for the last 30 years or so, I've been um, off and on working with Mark. And when I haven't been working with Mark, I've usually been doing something else, often something completely different, um, be it a tour or an album or whatever. I do enjoy working on many different genres of music and with different artists. I find it fascinating the way how different people are in terms of the way they work and the way they hear music and the way they produce music. So I just love it all.
Do you think I've Rudy Sarzo, the bass guitarist, came on and I asked him how much he practiced, and he was devoted to his craft. And I asked him if he thought he was as good a musician as he's ever been, and he said, "Of course." Do you think that rule applies to you as well, Guy?
Um, I've got to be honest. No, it doesn't, because I don't practice enough. Because I say busy doing other things. I love engineering and I love producing just as much as I love playing. So, and I love to be able to pick up an instrument, and I don't mind not being perfect, not being brilliant at it. I enjoy having to learn it again, which is often the case with when I do pick up an instrument, or if I'm asked to play to play on a tour. I quite relish the fact that I'm not as good as I should be um, in that job, and I've often felt guilty. And being in Mark's band is a very humbling experience, because the level of musicianship in his current band is quite extraordinary. And so I basically keep my mouth shut and go and practice a lot when we do work together, um, because they really are something else. And the combined, never mind the musicianship, but the musical knowledge is just something I'm really appreciate being a part of.
Yeah.
Um, because they really are. I mean, Jim, for example, the piano player can probably name and tell you every single record that was produced between 1950 and 1970 and the label, and he'll tell you who played what on every single record. And he's probably got that record in his
Yeah.
collection.
Yeah.
You know, they're just genuine, kind of over the top, if that's possible, music lovers. They and it's just amazing to be around people. You know, I thought I loved music, but my God, this lot, they yeah, they put me to shame sometimes. And so it is very humbling. And the upshot of it all, it makes you work harder. Um, and and so the music is better.
Yeah. I'm sure your peers would be equally as complimentary to you as you are to them. Um, Guy, my music choice is Depeche Mode. I can't. If people don't like that, I'm sorry, but I've loved them all my life. And I was going to ask you a question about the relationship with fans and people who come and listen to music. I guess when I go to Depeche Mode concert, the more obscure the song, the better for me. Because I'm such a super
Yeah,
fan. But
yeah,
most people come along and just want to hear him sing, just can't get enough.
yeah.
What's it like for you as a musician? I mean, they want to hear when you're on stage with Mark, they want to hear Walk of Life, don't they? They want to hear Romeo and Juliet. Is that a nice place to be? To keep them hanging until, or are you
Yeah.
really passionate about your new stuff and getting it out there and getting new people hearing it?
No, I think you have to strike a balance, and you use the hits to shape the show, and that's the way we always did it. You know, the hits are a high point, and so you save them. You know, our show was very dynamically crafted um, from the Dire Straits days. Mark was always very careful about how he built the set list, and you know, a new song has to go in a certain place, otherwise it doesn't have the impact, or it just seems wrong. So the show has to have a shape to it, and those classic hits are very much a part of that, because for the majority they're a high point. So and most bands do that. They'll save the big hits till the end, and then they'll do an even bigger one on the encore, and it's no different to us. And but there is a time and a place to put new stuff and stuff that you want to play,
Yeah, yeah.
basically.
And what's your kind of approach to music today, Guy? I mean, I've spoken to one artist I spoke to was a lady called Lone Lady who is a wonderful artist and works very hard, but doesn't make much money.
Yeah,
And it's pretty tough, isn't it, being a young musician?
very, very tough. Very tough. I mean, it was always tough, but it does seem tougher now. And I'm always reassured by the fact that so many people want to make music, and so many people do make music and do make a living at it. And hats off to everyone who does, because it's extremely difficult with the way music streaming is, and the revenues that actually get to the artists. I know John is very vocal about John Ilsley is very vocal about the fact that artists just don't get paid enough, and if at all, from by the major labels, and it's not fair. And so it's just something that we are fighting at every opportunity if we can. But also, particularly young artists, you find a way to make it work. And there are some very clever people out there doing very clever things and making something of it. So I love so much of the new music that's out there now. There is a lot. There's also a lot of bad music, but that's always been the way as well. You know, music is very subjective, and it's it's just a wonderful thing to be a part of.
Yeah. Do you keep up to date with music? Do you look for new music, or are you a man of nostalgia and like to look back at?
No, I do. I look at all sorts of music, particularly being involved in Atmos so much these days. Um, I'm always listening to what people are doing with that format, both young and the older artists, because a lot of artists are re-releasing their stuff in Atmos, and I really enjoy hearing how they're doing it. And new artists are doing Atmos mixes of their new things, and there's some really adventurous things going on, both musically and in terms of production. And so I spend a lot of time on iTunes, because that's the main streaming service for Atmos. Just discovering new things.
Yeah. Guy, I've loved chatting to you. It's been a real privilege for me to speak to you about music. What final question, I suppose, is what would that Guy Fletcher, that kid in the careers office, perhaps say about Guy now in his studio with a career behind him and still one to look forward to? What do you think
Well, I would just say told you so, because even at that time, even when he was laughing at me, I knew that I would be doing something in music. Quite what, I had no idea, but I knew I would be successful.
Yeah. Well,
I
that's
just knew it.
yeah.
So confidence, really, I suppose. Whether it was misguided, I don't know, because I just felt strong about it.
Yeah. Well, I don't think it was misguided in the slightest. It's been fabulous.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. Well, Guy, thank you so much. Thanks for coming on the Godcast
Pleasure, Alex.
and wish you well. And is there any live gigs in the pipeline or?
Sadly not. No, Mark has decided not to play any more shows. So we're very much concentrating on recording, and I mean he's still writing as much as he ever did. So, and I'm remixing older stuff in Atmos, as I said.
Yeah.
So there's lots of things happening from Mark, and I'm involved in other things, in other production projects. So there's lots of things to keep me busy.
Fabulous. Okay. Well, thanks. Thanks again. And we send our love to from Lancashire to wherever you are and wish you well and thank you.
Thanks.